We're going to cross on over and talk to Chris Banbury, who's the editor of the Socialist Workers' Party in Rome, who joins us on the phone to get more of an idea of the depth of this incident. Chris Banbury, thank you very much for joining us. The terrorist has said there are 80 suicide cells across Western Europe. Well, it tells a lot about the European intelligence failure when it comes to homegrown terrorism, doesn't it?
Well, I think you're seeing here a constant refrain, which I noticed from the British police, that these are just individuals. These are individual madmen. And I don't think you can just explain this Barrack's attack, Barrack himself or these other things by just saying they're simply madmen. There is clearly a growing connection between far-right fascist groups. The fact that Barrack himself had contact with 500 members of the English Defence League, a violent anti-Islamic organisation in Britain, shows the length of those connections. And he himself said that he was introduced into far-right politics through connections in Britain. It's a regular occurrence now that people are fascist, individual fascists and racists, anti-Islamic people are found as weapons explosives. And it seems to me that the police and the security forces are passing this up precisely because they are fixated on Islam, so-called Islamic terrorism, as part of the war on terror. And therefore they're ignoring what is a growing tide of racist anti-Islamic politics across Western Europe. And what we've seen in Norway, unfortunately, is a terrible price being paid for ignoring these networks of individuals which are extending. And I think we have to say something else, that the politics of fear being created in Western Europe by right-wing, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim organizations and parties, people like Geert Wilders in Holland, it's creating a climate in which these attacks are more likely to happen. If you push the politics, essentially, of exclusion, of saying that Islam is not part of European society, it's not that different from what happened with the Jews in the 1920s and 30s when people said they're not part of European society. There was a consequence of that. The consequence of that was murder. And I think we have to say that by pushing the politics of banning the burqa, banning minarets and so on, anti-migrant politics as well, it leads to violence against Islamic people in Europe, it leads to violence against migrants. And therefore I think it's important that politicians and other organizations across Western Europe don't just simply condemn this terrible attack in Norway, but come out with a clear stand against anti-Islamic politics in Western Europe and anti-immigrant politics in Western Europe. It's beholding on them to do that in the wake of this, because this was not just an individual. This was a man who was clearly tied in, as you've said, to a number of networks across Europe, and I will wager that also in North America. People who believe on the verge of a race war, and also have this fantasy that somehow Islam is waging a race war in Europe against the population there. I mean, where is this race war? In Britain, where is it, for instance, or in France, where the two biggest Islamic populations are in Europe? There is no evidence whatsoever of this. And I think, as I say, it's incumbent on politicians and other organizations in Western Europe to come out and take a clear stance against this demonization of Islam, which is encouraging these attacks.
So basically an atmosphere, as you mentioned, of right-wing anti-immigrants and anti-Islamist parties in Europe, combined with how, for example, in Switzerland, regarding the minarets in France and the banning of Belgium and the banning of the burqa. This, of course, shows that the country was so heavily focused on finding ways of fighting Muslim groups that maybe this incident might now turn the attention to far-right extremists. Do you think that will occur?
Well, I hope it will occur, but I think the problem is the security forces in all the different countries of Western Europe and North America are so fixated on this Islamophobic agenda as a consequence of the war on terror, the war that's was conducted in Iraq and is now being conducted in Afghanistan and Libya, that's where their attention is. And therefore, I would hope that is. But I think there's also something else that needs to be said. I think we need to put across a more positive message that Islam is not just something, we should not just be attacking Islamophobia. We should also be saying something else, that Islam is part of European civilization. I'm speaking today from Italy. Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian Prime Minister, famously said Islam had nothing to do with civilization. Well, he clearly knows nothing about the history of Italy. Islamic Sicily was one of the great centers of knowledge and science in medieval Europe. And I think we also have to turn around and say something else, is that who was it that invented Auschwitz, invented the Holocaust? Who invented anti-Semitism? It was Europe, I'm afraid. Where were the Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal? Where did they find refuge? They found them in the Ottoman Empire and in Islamic countries. If you look at Iran during what in European terms is called medieval times, was a center of scientific knowledge where Jews and Christians and others were welcomed to make their contribution. Unlike here in Rome, for instance, where people have been burnt at the stake for saying things like the world was round. I think we have to put across a more positive image that Islam is not just some recent arrival in Europe. It's been part of European civilization, and the eradication of Islam in this idea of it is something we have to challenge. That we have to say Islam has been here for centuries in Europe. It's contributed massively to European civilization in all sorts of ways. And far from demonizing Muslims, we should recognize the role that Islam has played globally and in Europe in terms of developing civilization.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris Manberry, editor of the Socialist Workers' Party from Rome, giving us his take on what has occurred